principal problem has been caused by the emissions of greenhouse gases resulting from the way that we have chosen to generate our energy, particularly our electricity, over the last 100 years or so. So the primary cause of that across the world is the use of coal. So I suppose the priority should be to stop relying on coal to generate electricity, which means looking for alternative ways of generating power that are clean and renewable. So the priority would be to generate much more of our electricity from renewable sources and exploit the wind and the wave and the sun that are the main sources of that, combined with being much more clever and efficient in the way that we use the energy that we use. We have been living a lifestyle that is not necessarily sustainable in terms of the resources that we are using from the planet. So we need to be much cleverer about the way we use our energy and be more responsible, really, that actually this is not going to be able to continue if we intend to leave a planet to our future generations that we have inherited. But at the same time, the spread of responsibility between different countries is quite different. The United States, for example, has the highest amount of carbon dioxide emitted per person, whereas countries in Africa are right down near the bottom. So they are not necessarily responsible for causing the problem. So a solution for us all has to take into account the fact that we are not all equally responsible for having caused this, which is why we need a global agreement, really. And that is what is coming up towards the end of this year at Copenhagen. In order for countries to feel comfortable about making the fairly substantial changes to their own ways of life, and they need to feel that they are part of a global approach where everybody is playing their part, depending on the responsibility that they have for causing the problem in the first place. So that global agreement is absolutely fundamental. And at the moment, the global agreement is not necessarily going to take place, is not going to be adequate for the challenge of tackling global warming and keeping our planet safe. So I think one of the key things that individuals can do, apart from making small measures in their own home to be clever in the way they use energy and to try and use less, full stop, is to demand action from our political leaders. Because if they don't feel the demand for action coming from their own people, then they won't feel that they have enough pressure on them to take commitments on that will then allow this deal to occur. We have enough renewable energy across the world to power our energy needs. It's a question of how much you're prepared to pay to exploit that. We feel that the European Union has gone relatively far, having committed to the whole of Europe generating 20% of its energy from renewable resources by 2020. But that is not enough in the scale, in the context of the problem that we are facing. Another illustration might be that Europe has committed to reducing their carbon dioxide emissions by 20%. But the science of climate change, which is becoming increasingly urgent, indicates that we would need to be pushing that to 30% by that time frame in order to do our bit to tackle climate change. So although there has been incremental steps which are positive, we are still nowhere near the scale of effort that needs to take place in order to address this threat. And the consequences of not doing so, we feel, are so dramatic that if the public understand, then they would realize that that shift to a low-carbon future, one that is prioritized with renewable energy primarily, but also being much cleverer in the way we use energy, is something that they want. But at the moment, the political leaders are not necessarily reflecting their interests. Europe has a historical responsibility on the issue of climate change. Climate change essentially began here in Europe with the birth of the Industrial Revolution. So for the last 100 years or so, Europe has led the running on causing climate change. Therefore, we have a historical obligation, and a moral obligation, in fact, to lead the world away from climate change. At the same time, we also have the economic, technical, and engineering expertise to develop clean energy technologies like renewable energy that will be the main tools for addressing this issue. And the benefit of that will be that we can generate hundreds of thousands of jobs, which at a time when we are in a global economic recession, we are going to be further exposed to international oil prices increases or not. That opportunity seems to be one that we must take because it meets a number of objectives. It secures our energy supplies, it generates thousands of jobs, so it kickstarts our economy, and it tackles climate change. Now that package together, if we can take that opportunity, that will constitute leadership on the issue of climate change. Oh, I think we have to be very careful of carbon capture and storage, and certainly fusion. I think we should take them separately. Fusion is something which has been 10, 20 years away for at least the last 50 years or so. We have been studying and researching this for over half a century now, and we are still nowhere near actually acquiring this as some sort of silver bullet technology. So one, I don't think it's actually ever going to materialize. Two, the cost of this, who knows how much this will cost, and particularly when there are cheaper, readily available solutions already. And three, we simply don't have time to rely on untested, unknown solutions when basically the opportunity to tackle climate change at cheapest cost is in the next 10 years, not in the next half a century or so. Nuclear fusion, as with the rest of the nuclear industry, is essentially a false hope. It's not really going to be a solution to climate change because the threat of climate change is here now. It is the next 10 years, really, which is going to be the major opportunity in which we either tackle climate change or we're faced with a massive bill for trying to adapt to its consequences. Nuclear fusion has been on the drawing board for about half a century. We're still nowhere nearer. We should be investing in the real solutions which do exist now, which is renewable energy and energy efficiency. We don't know whether carbon capture and storage will really have a role to play in the future, in the longer term. What we do know is that it won't have a role to play in at least the next 10 years. Nobody is arguing that CCS could be viable on a commercial scale in that period, and that is the key period when the real solutions of renewable energy and efficiency need to be deployed. The threat of carbon capture and storage is that it is used to justify building new coal plants. And here in the UK, there is a very good example of that, where the first new coal plant proposed in the UK for over 3 decades is being sold on the basis that it will be a carbon capture and storage demonstration. But if you actually look at what that means, it means maybe a quarter of that plant might capture its emissions if it works. And the rest of that new plant will simply emit carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. That is not leadership on the issue of climate change. We simply cannot be building new coal-fired power stations if we're serious about tackling this threat. So that's one of the main the main problems that CCS pose. The second problem that CCS poses is that it distracts attention, political and also financial attention, away from deploying what we think are more readily available and cheaper solutions, which is renewable energy and energy efficiency. So in that way, you would put carbon capture and storage way down your list of possible solutions in technologies, and you wouldn't really be prioritizing them over the next 10-year phase, because right now we need to get renewable energy deployed as fast and as far and wide as we possibly can. Well, for me, the issue of climate change is the defining issue of our age. In many ways that the Cold War was for the previous generation, this is something that we all will be affected by, whether we choose to address it or not. That's a fact. At the same time, there are 2 other major crises, one which is already occurring, which is the financial crisis across the globe, and a second one which is coming towards us in the form of what will basically be the oil crisis, as oil essentially runs out and the basis of that society goes with it. So tackling climate change, I believe, is also a means of essentially tackling that financial recession and protecting ourselves against future crises of that kind, and also protecting ourselves against fossil fuel insecurity, which will just become more and more of an issue. So the potential benefits of going down a cleaner, renewable energy generated, more efficient, energy efficient lifestyle will tackle all of those issues at once, and I believe create a society where there'll be much more cooperation, and it should be a much more pleasant environment for us all to live. So that potential gain is so vast that I really hope that we as a planet can actually take that.